Hey guys, tonight we're going to drift into one of those corners of history that sounds like a bad soap opera, but unfortunately was completely real. So, fluff your pillow, dim your lights, and get ready to be lulled into sleep by the deeply dysfunctional world of medieval royalty. Our theme for tonight? The queens who, allegedly or actually, ended up sharing far more than family dinners with their brothers. Because when you combine dynasties obsessed with pure bloodlines with courts full of gossip and paranoia, you get situations where the family tree looks less like a tree and more like a tangled knot of twigs. Now, before we dive in, a quick reminder. Medieval chroniclers loved scandal. They wrote accusations of incest almost as eagerly as medieval nobles threw feasts. So sometimes these stories are exaggerated, sometimes they're politically motivated, and sometimes they're depressingly true. Let's float into our first example. Isabella of Castile. Not the famous Isabella who sponsored Columbus, this one is Isabella of Castile, born in the 14th century, the sister of King Henry II of Castile. And if you think medieval Spain was complicated, you're right. It was a messy family feud playground with more betrayals than a daytime TV series. Chroniclers accused Isabella of having an overly affectionate relationship with her brother Henry. And by overly affectionate, I mean whispers of incest that even the Pope couldn't ignore. Of course, was it true? Hard to say. What we do know is that Isabella became a political pawn, married off to John I of Aragon, and dragged into the endless dynastic tug-of-war that was Iberian politics. The incest rumors stuck, though, probably because Henry's enemies found them very convenient. Nothing discredits a king like being accused of family bed sharing. Now, moving north, we find a far more famous case, Joanna of Castile, better known as Juana la Loca, or Joanna the Mad. She wasn't necessarily accused of brotherly love, but her dynasty, the Trastamaras, and later the Habsburgs, made sibling romance almost a tradition. Her ancestors had a suspicious habit of intermarrying cousins so often that brother and sister relationships weren't entirely shocking to contemporaries. Joanna herself ended up married to Philip the Handsome, who, fun fact, was indeed handsome, but mostly in the sense of a smug, spoiled European princeling. He also cheated on her constantly, which didn't help her rumored instability. But let's keep on track. The idea of queens or princesses sleeping with their brothers wasn't just Spanish gossip. It shows up across Europe. Take Anna of Saxony, for instance. She was the second wife of William the Silent, leader of the Dutch Revolt. Anna had a miserable life. She was mentally unstable, trapped in a marriage she hated, and eventually accused of affairs with several men. And because slandering women was practically a medieval sport, rumors floated that she had a special relationship with one of her brothers. Again, maybe true, maybe just another round of dynastic mudslinging. But here's the thing. Whether the incest was real or imagined, these queens paid the price. Their reputations, their marriages, their children's legitimacy, it all got tangled up in accusations that today would read like clickbait headlines. Medieval queen caught in forbidden love with brother. You won't believe what happened next. Of course, unlike BuzzFeed, medieval courts didn't just shrug at these stories. They used them as weapons. Kings were dethroned. Queens were locked up. Alliances collapsed, all because someone whispered, "I think she's a little too close to her brother." And speaking of closeness, we can't forget Eleanor of Aquitaine's daughter, Marie of Champagne, who was rumored to be suspiciously intimate with her brother Richard the Lionheart. Richard himself faced endless accusations of having inappropriate relationships with both men and women. Basically, if medieval gossip columns existed, Richard would have had his own dedicated page. Did Richard and Marie ever cross the sibling line? Historians debate it, but the rumors stuck hard enough to shape Richard's posthumous reputation. So, as you're drifting to sleep tonight, imagine being a medieval queen. You're already stuck in a cold castle, married off to a man twice your age, constantly watched by servants and courtiers. And then, the one person you trust, your brother, becomes the subject of scandalous whispers. Whether you're guilty or not doesn't matter, because in medieval politics, rumors are as dangerous as armies, and that's only the beginning. We've barely scratched the surface of sibling scandals. There are still queens who outright admitted it, kings who encouraged it, and dynasties that practically relied on it to keep power. But let's float over slowly, because next we'll meet a queen whose brotherly affection was so famous it shaped an entire kingdom's politics. All right, let's drift into another royal scandal. This time we're hovering over the 12th century, when everyone was busy crusading, backstabbing, and occasionally being a little too affectionate with their siblings. One of the juiciest sets of rumors swirled around Richard the Lionheart. Yes, the famous Crusader king, knight in shining armor, and general headache for medieval Europe. Richard wasn't a queen, of course, but his sisters. Well, their names kept popping up in some awkward gossip. Now, Richard had several sisters. The one we're focusing on tonight is Joan of England. Joan was married off to William II of Sicily, which, as far as medieval arranged marriages went, wasn't the worst deal. Sicily had good weather, citrus fruit, and fewer freezing castles. But after William died, Joan returned to her brother Richard's court, and that's when the whispers began. Chroniclers, never ones to let a rumor go to waste, hinted that Joan and Richard had a relationship that went far beyond the usual sibling bond. Was there any truth to it? Probably not. But in the medieval imagination, Richard was already suspect. He wasn't exactly known for fathering heirs. Spoiler, he didn't have any legitimate children at all, and that made everyone extra eager to fill in the blanks with scandal. So, the story of Richard and Joan drifted through the courts of Europe. Did they actually share a bed? No real evidence, but the fact people believed it tells us a lot about how fragile reputations were. A king who neglected his queen surrounded himself with male companions and traveled constantly with his sister. Naturally, the rumor machine went wild. Now, Joan wasn't the only sister tangled in Richard's reputation. His other sister, Marie of Champagne, was rumored again, mostly by enemies, to have a suspicious closeness with him. Poor Marie probably never expected her family tree to become the subject of medieval tabloid headlines. But here we are. And if you're wondering why people jump so quickly to incest accusations, the answer is simple. It was the ultimate smear campaign. In a world where dynasties thrived on claims of purity, nothing ruined your standing faster than being accused of sharing a bed with your sibling. It undermined marriages, cast doubt on heirs, and painted your entire family as morally corrupt. Basically, the medieval version of a political scandal. Let's also remember, royal courts were tiny claustrophobic places. Everyone lived in the same handful of rooms. Gossip spread faster than the plague, and brothers and sisters often relied on each other for survival. From the outside, those close relationships looked suspicious, And once someone whispered, "Well, maybe it's more than just sibling affection," the rumor became impossible to shake off. Richard the Lionheart's case is fascinating because it shows how incest rumors clung even to kings who were supposed to be heroic legends. He could conquer castles, lead crusades, and terrify Saladin. But back home, people were still saying, "Yeah, but isn't he a little too close with his sister?" And poor Joan. She ended up remarried to Raymond VI of Toulouse, a man with his own collection of scandals. Their marriage was famously miserable. Maybe the rumors about Richard were invented to explain why she wasn't exactly enthusiastic about her husbands. Or maybe it was just the medieval habit of turning every family bond into a conspiracy. Either way, Joan's reputation was permanently tangled with Richard's. And Richard's legend, for all its crusading glory, was always shadowed by whispers of brotherly affection. So, as you're dozing off, think about this. In the grand scheme of medieval politics, sometimes it didn't matter what you did. It mattered what people thought you did. And if you were unlucky enough to be born a royal sibling, you might find yourself accused of sleeping with your brother, whether you liked it or not. Now, let's float over to France. Because if Spain and England were messy, the French court was basically the Olympic Games of royal scandal. And our next queen? She didn't just get accused, she leaned right into it. So, we've lingered in Spain and England. Let's float now to early 14th century France, where royal scandals didn't just whisper through the corridors, they exploded like fireworks over the Seine. Enter the infamous Tour de Nesle affair. If you've never heard of it, think of it as the medieval version of a reality TV cheating scandal, except it involved queens, their lovers, and accusations that shook the French crown to its core. The story begins with King Philip IV of France, also called Philip the Fair. Spoiler, he was fair in the sense of handsome, but also fair in the sense of cold as a marble statue. He left behind 3 sons, Louis, Philip, and Charles. Conveniently, all 3 became kings in turn, which is neat succession planning, except their wives caused absolute chaos. Now here's where it gets messy. Louis's wife, Margaret of Burgundy, and Charles's wife, Blanche of Burgundy, were accused of having affairs with 2 brothers, common knights named Philip and Gautier d'Aunay. How did this come to light? Allegedly, Philip IV's daughter, Isabella of France, who, by the way, was married to Edward II of England, spotted her sisters-in-law exchanging embroidered purses with the d'Aunay brothers. And in the medieval world, giving your purse to a man was less cute accessory and more, "Hey, let's meet in a tower for questionable activities." So Isabella tattled, or, depending on which chronicler you read, she gleefully orchestrated the whole downfall. Either way, the scandal unraveled quickly. The sisters-in-law were accused, the d'Aunay brothers were tortured until they confessed, and then brutally executed. And by brutal, I mean the medieval version of, "We're going to make sure you regret every decision that led you here." Now, where does the queen sleeping with their brothers theme fit in? Because here's the fun part. French chroniclers, never satisfied with one scandal, layered on rumors that the Burgundian princesses were not only unfaithful, but also a little too close with their own brothers. Incest accusations added that extra spice of moral corruption. It was the medieval press equivalent of, "Well, if they're cheating with knights, why not accuse them of keeping it in the family too?" For Marguerite and Blanche, the incest rumors stuck. They were locked up in bleak fortresses, Marguerite in Chateau Gaillard, where she allegedly froze to death or was strangled, depending on who you believe. Blanche spent years imprisoned, her royal status reduced to a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, their husbands became kings, Louis and Charles, and both of them reigned under the shadow of their wives' disgrace. Louis, for instance, barely had time to enjoy being king before dying suddenly after a vigorous tennis match. Yes, tennis existed in the 14th century, and yes, he died from it. Sometimes history doesn't even need embellishment. The Tour de Nesle affair mattered far beyond family drama. It cast doubt on the legitimacy of royal heirs, destabilized the Capetian dynasty, and gave chroniclers endless material to write about. Imagine a medieval monk, quill in hand, gleefully scribbling about how the queens were not only unfaithful, but also possibly keeping it all in the Burgundy bloodline. And remember, for medieval rulers, incest wasn't just scandalous. It was dynastic sabotage. If a queen had children while accused of brotherly or knightly entanglements, those children's claims to the throne could be questioned forever. The affair also gave Isabella of France her famous nickname, the She-Wolf of France. And honestly, she earned it. She used the downfall of her sisters-in-law to boost her own influence, and later she'd go on to overthrow her husband Edward II of England with her lover Roger Mortimer. Clearly, Isabella wasn't just sitting in the corner with embroidery. But back to the sisters. Marguerite and Blanche became symbols of fallen queens, women punished not just for what they may have done, but for how useful their disgrace was to the men in power. Whether they actually slept with their brothers, their lovers, or nobody at all, almost didn't matter. The scandal was too delicious to waste. So, as you're drifting deeper into sleep, picture a cold stone tower in France. Two young queens, once glittering at court, now shivering behind barred windows, their reputations ruined forever. And outside, chroniclers sharpening their pens, ready to accuse them of every sin under the medieval sun, including a little brotherly love. Let's float along, because our next stop takes us east into the tangled world of the Habsburgs. And if you thought the French were messy, wait until you see what happened when a dynasty built its entire empire on marrying close relatives. So, we've wandered through Spain, England, and France. Now let's glide eastward into the ever-complicated world of the Habsburgs. If you've ever seen a family tree so tangled it looks like someone dropped spaghetti on parchment, that's the Habsburg dynasty. The Habsburgs weren't shy about inbreeding. In fact, they considered it a perfectly reasonable strategy for keeping power consolidated. Cousin marriages? Standard. Uncle-niece pairings? Not shocking. By the time you look at Charles II of Spain, the poor man who inherited centuries of genetic recycling, you realize this family treated the gene pool like a kiddie pond. And naturally, whenever rumors of sibling intimacy surfaced, people nodded and said, well, with the Habsburgs, maybe. Let's pause on Joanna of Castile's descendants, since she was married into the Habsburg line. Joanna herself wasn't accused of sibling love, but her children and grandchildren lived in a dynastic system where marrying your close relatives was the rule, not the exception. And when everyone at court is your cousin, the line between scandal and family reunion gets blurry. One particularly juicy example comes with Maria Anna of Austria, sister of Ferdinand III, Holy Roman Emperor. She married, wait for it, her first cousin, Philip IV of Spain. That was considered perfectly respectable, but whispers also suggested she was far closer to her brother Ferdinand than court etiquette usually allowed. Did they cross the line? No solid proof, but chroniclers, especially those outside the Habsburg orbit, loved hinting that the Spanish-Austrian dynasty blurred family boundaries a little too comfortably. And then there's Margaret of Austria, who married her uncle, Philip III of Spain. Yes, uncle. Which legally required papal dispensation, but in Habsburg circles was just another Tuesday. Once you normalize uncle-niece marriages, it doesn't take much for a rumor of brother-sister intimacy to stick. Outsiders looked at this dynasty and assumed everyone must be sharing beds at family dinners. The most infamous case of Habsburg genetics collapsing in on itself is, of course, Charles II of Spain, sometimes called El Hechizado, or the Bewitched. He wasn't accused of incest with siblings, mostly because he was too sickly and frail for much of anything, but his appearance told the entire genetic story. The Habsburg jaw was so exaggerated on him, it looked like a caricature. He struggled with basic health his entire life, and he couldn't produce heirs. Charles was basically a walking advertisement for why marrying your relatives repeatedly isn't the greatest long-term plan. And here's the thing. While direct evidence of medieval queens literally sleeping with their brothers is rare, the Habsburgs created an environment where people assumed it could happen. When your sister is also your cousin and possibly your future wife, lines blur. Gossip doesn't just fill the gaps, it becomes the expected narrative. For queens in this family, the incest rumors were part of the package deal. Whether it was Maria Anna, Margaret, or any of the other dozen Habsburg princesses shipped across Europe, people snickered about how close they were to their brothers. Sometimes it was slander from political enemies. Sometimes it was the uncomfortable truth that they'd already married a blood relative just one branch over. Imagine trying to keep all that straight. Yes, this is my brother, but also my cousin, and possibly my uncle-in-law. And yes, we share grandparents. 3 times, for the Habsburgs, the line between dynastic duty and scandalous intimacy was paper thin. Queens got caught in it constantly. Whether they ever acted on brotherly affection didn't matter. What mattered was that everyone already believed it was plausible. So as you drift off, think of a Habsburg banquet hall, rows of pale, jaw-heavy royals, all technically related, clinking goblets of Spanish wine. Somewhere in the corner, a courtier whispers, "You know, she's very close with her brother," and everyone nods, because honestly, would you even be surprised? Let's float now to our final stop, because if the Habsburgs gave us the genetics, England gave us one of the juiciest alleged sibling scandals in royal history, and it involved a queen so infamous, her story became legend. So we've wandered across Europe, Spain, France, the Habsburgs, and floated through centuries of royal whispers. Let's end tonight with one of the most infamous English cases where incest rumors didn't just stain reputations, they sent heads rolling. We're talking about Anne Boleyn, second wife of Henry VIII, and her brother George Boleyn. Now, Anne Boleyn is already one of history's most overanalyzed women. She was brilliant, ambitious, and stylish, and she managed to hold off Henry's advances for years until he basically broke England apart to marry her. But as we know, Henry's attention span was shorter than his temper. By 1536, Anne had failed to produce a living son, and Henry had grown smitten with Jane Seymour. So, naturally, he needed Anne gone. Enter Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister, and nothing removes a queen faster than accusing her of every sin under the sun: adultery, witchcraft, treason, and, just to spice things up, incest with her brother George. The charges were absurd. According to court records, Anne and George had supposedly carried on a sexual relationship to produce illegitimate heirs. One account even claimed Anne mocked Henry's sexual performance to her brother, a conversation that probably never happened, but it made for damning evidence. Anne denied it. George denied it. Pretty much everyone knew it was nonsense, but in Tudor England, truth mattered less than politics. By accusing Anne of incest, Henry and Cromwell ensured her downfall was permanent. No queen could come back from a charge like that. At the trial, Anne stayed calm, even witty, while facing accusations that would horrify anyone. George, too, defended himself eloquently, but it didn't matter. The verdict was decided before they entered the courtroom. Both were condemned. George was executed on May 17, 1536, and Anne followed 2 days later, beheaded by a French swordsman specially brought in for the occasion. The incest charges were never proven because, of course, there was nothing to prove. But they stuck in history. For centuries, Anne Boleyn's reputation has carried that shadow. Some saw her as a seductress capable of anything, others as a victim of cruel politics. Either way, the incest accusation was the nail in her coffin. And here's the irony. Henry VIII himself was no stranger to bending church law to marry relatives. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, had been married to his brother Arthur. His sixth wife, Catherine Parr, was related to him through multiple tangled cousin lines. But when it came to Anne, suddenly, family intimacy was unacceptable. Convenient, isn't it? Anne's case shows us the ultimate danger of these rumors. For Isabella, Joan, Marguerite, and the Habsburgs, incest whispers damaged reputations. But for Anne, they became a weapon of execution, a queen destroyed not by what she did, but by what her enemies claimed she did with her brother. So, as you drift deeper into sleep, imagine the Tower of London on a quiet May morning, a woman accused of the unthinkable, waiting for a sword that will make her one of history's most tragic legends. Around her, courtiers whisper, chroniclers sharpen their quills, and the story of a queen who allegedly slept with her brother takes root, whether true or not. And that's the lullaby of history tonight. Queens and princesses, trapped in dynasties that demanded purity but thrived on gossip. Some may have loved too closely. Some may have been entirely innocent. But once the rumor was spoken, it could never be taken back. So close your eyes. Let the scandals of medieval courts fade into quiet shadows. And remember, history isn't always about battles and kings. Sometimes it's about the rumors that destroyed queens, whispered, repeated, and written down until they became legends. Sleep well.